Ladies and gentlemen, questers, beautiful to have you here again today. My name is Emma, and today we're going to talk about chemicals and how they affect our health. If you're anything like me, the first reaction that you might have when you hear chemicals, it's like, oh, I don't want chemicals in my life, and I don't actually have chemicals in my life. I don't want it on my food. I don't want all of these numbers and bits and pieces that my body doesn't recognize in condiments or anywhere near my cooking. I don't want chemicals in my cleaning products. I definitely don't want it sprayed around me to help with the weeds. I don't want it in my practice. And what we understand is that chemicals in our world today are so abundant, and they're so much more than they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. In fact, the chemicals that we have now are having such a gigantic effect on us as human beings, on our microbiome, on our nervous system. And I'm sure if you're listening to this and if you're a chiropractor, I'm certainly not the first one to be introducing this to you. I actually suspect that you have quite a grand idea and understanding of the fundamentals of chemical exposure. So we're not going to be going into so much of that today. However, we will touch on it because the topic is your health and chemicals. But also, we're going to be having a chat today about your internal chemicals. So as chiropractors, we understand that our nervous system is the fundamental controller, or the one that has the ability to dictate how our body functions. And second to that is our chemical system. So our body is made up of chemicals. Our chemical messengers are our hormones. So we're going to be having a bit of a chat about that and how that refers to your health, and also how they're affected. So we're going to be talking about the external, we're going to be talking about the internal, and then we're going to finish off with a little fun topic. When the pharmaceutical, or the rise of the pharmaceutical revolution came in the 1900s, the early 1900s, around 1930, what we saw was huge consumption of outside in, and these changes or these effects or the different dynamics that started to occur when people started to rely on the pharmaceutical industry was really interesting when we're looking at the psychology, but also on an individual level of what started to change and the excitement that happened within the human world as we believed that we could change our destinies by taking something from the outside in. And so if you are awake in the world today, and if you're exposed to what's happening perhaps in the medicine world, there's a tendency to move away, at least with the people who are running a bit faster than the mainstream, moving away from the pharmaceutical industry, but they are moving towards a different type of chemical. And so we're going to have a conversation about the different type of chemical that people are moving towards or leaning on or getting really excited about at the moment, and that is in the world of plant medicine. So we're talking about marijuana, we're talking about mushrooms, we're talking about ayahuasca, we're talking about peyote, all of this world over here that seems to be creating a bit of a buzz. And so we're going to get to that. So first we're going to start with the external stuff. We're going to have a look at the internal stuff, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat about that and how that is going to affect your health. And so the first thing that we're going to have a look at is the external environment and the chemicals and how they affect us. Now, the really great thing is that this is mainstream. This is becoming more and more known by households, of the effects of the detergent that we're using to wash our clothes, to wash our dishes, the things that we're spraying on the bench. In fact, even the beauty products that we're using, the moisturizers, the perfumes that we're spraying, not to mention there's a huge movement towards buying organic because of what they're spraying on our food. So I won't spend too long talking about this because of how, because of the industry that you're in, and you understand this likely quite deeply. But what I will say is the reason it's important, and the reason we're seeing such a huge effect, at least what we understand in the science today, and I'm sure more and more will come out, the more and more science is actually able to measure things, and this isn't just an inherent knowing that we have as humans, is because of our bacteria. So as a human being, we understand that we're approximately 50 trillion cells. And of these 50 trillion cells, between 80 and 90% of these cells are actually bacteria or microbe cells. And it's not that, yeah, I'm made up of this much bacteria and microbe. It's like, hey, how awesome is this? Because these bacteria and microbes are the things that covering our skin, which creates a protective barrier. They're in all of our orifices, mucosal linings. They help, they're a part of our immune system. They're a part of the way that we digest food, at least the bacteriums that are in our digestive system. They help with our breathing. They help with keeping our microbiome within our gut balance, within our whole system. They're a huge part to the way that we function hormonally also. And so the reason that we know as fact that chemicals from the external world have such an impact on our health is because they're impacting our bacteria. And if we have a look at, perhaps we can focus on food and what they're spraying on our food. In many countries, glyphosate is a really common herbicide, pesticide, fungicide that they're spraying across our crops to kill all of the bugs. And it passes FDA and our TGA because it doesn't affect human cells. Now, if we rewind 2 minutes, why is this important? Is because only 10% to 20% of our human makeup is human cells, and 80 to 90% is our microbiome. So this stuff is sprayed on food to kill the bugs. We then consume the food, and it's killing our bugs. Now, if we look specifically at glyphosate and some of the studies that are done on this, is there's a particular bug within our digestive system that creates a cascade of events in order to make our serotonin. And what we know is that our serotonin, at least 90% of it, is made in our gut. And this particular bacterium is affected by glyphosate. So if we're eating foods and crops that have been sprayed with this stuff, we then lose the beginning start or the beginning cycle of our happy hormone, or our longer term happy hormone, serotonin. And this is huge because we're no longer seeing huge epidemics of immunosuppressants. I just completely forgot about COVID, but that's a different conversation. But most of our health problems today, when we look at them, we've got our 5 big maladies. We've got cancer, we've got diabetes, we've got autoimmune disease, we've got obesity, and we have mental health. And when we look at mental health, there's a realm of reasons why we're at this point, and one of them has a huge amount to do with the chemicals in our world. Not only is it what we're spraying in our food, it's the beauty products. It takes about 26 seconds for whatever you put on your skin to absorb into your bloodstream. And so if you look at the ingredients list on your beauty products, including your perfumes or aftershaves, if you wouldn't eat it, should you put it on your skin? This is the same with our cleaning products that we're using in our homes. If you're spraying it on the bench and you wouldn't spray it in your mouth, should you be using it to clean the kitchen? There are so many different recipes these days that we can make our own homegrown cleaning products with essential oils, with vinegar, with bicarbonate soda, with different little combinations, we can come up with better cleaning products than perhaps are on the market that are full of chemicals. This is the same with our makeup. This is the same with our perfumes, our deodorants. We see a huge rise in breast cancer, and of course there's a big emotional element that's creating this, but also it's all of the aluminiums, the chemicals from the outside that are affecting the inside. We're meant to be able to have this excretory process that happens through our sweat glands. If all of a sudden we're stopping them because we're blocking the ability for our body to detox, all of a sudden it's going to land in a certain place. And what do you think that's going to do over time? The reason we smell, by the way, I just want to caveat this, the reason we smell is because of the bacteria on our skin. It's because of the bacteria within us. If you've ever done a fast or you've ever taken away a big part of the over stress of our digestive system, over time what you start to notice is perhaps in the first few days of your fast you might be, or a detox that you're doing or a diet that you're doing, you might be super stinky, but after some time you've cleaned up your diet, all of a sudden the microbiome within your digestive system and underneath your arms starts to change. And so perhaps the reason you need deodorant is not necessarily because you're a stinky person, perhaps it's because of what you're eating. And this is a really great segue into our internal chemicals. We could talk for a long time about all of the outside stuff, but as I said, I feel like I'm talking to healthcare professionals that are very knowledgeable about this already. If you're not familiar so much about the food, I recommend you, the food and chemicals, I recommend you to go and watch What's with Wheat to have an understanding, a greater understanding about what they're doing to our food industry. There's also lots on cleaning products. There's lots on beauty products as well. So perhaps if this is something that is news to you, use this as a stimulant to start to go and do some research into how you can improve your chemical or decrease your chemical load that you're exposed to. And in terms of our internal chemicals, I mentioned it on the introduction, but do you know the major chemical that is, I'm going to use the word natural inside of us? The one that drives a huge part of our process as human beings, one that drives life, the one that drives happiness. It's our hormones, right? And so when we have a chat about hormones, we're talking about our chemical messengers. And what we understand is that just like the nervous system, there's a fundamental interconnectedness of all things. So if your external environment is filled with an overwhelm of chemicals and perhaps not enough fresh air and sunlight, perhaps not enough outdoor activity, then the internal chemicals are going to be affected, because we can't do one thing without affecting another. So this is a beautiful segue into looking at our internal chemicals. Now, we're going to be having a look at two. The first one we spoke about in the beginning is something that we are inherently born with and is a major communication pathway within our body, although it's slower than our nervous system. It's our hormonal system. The other one we're going to talk about in terms of our chemical load is actually something that we consume and that we need to survive, and it's food. So we'll start with food first. And as long as it's not exposed to the overload of chemicals that we spoke about, so your herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, food is something that we use for survival, and it helps us thrive. It is from the process of digestion, so chewing, as long as you chew enough and as long as you eat in the correct order at the correct times for your body, is used and broken down into chemical components that create energy within your system. And this energy enters your cells and is used in your brain and in your body for you to function. Now, your digestive system is designed to go through periods where we eat and periods where we don't eat. And so periods where we're exposed to chemicals and energy, and periods where we have a break from that process of breaking things down. And so I'm going to bring a really big idea in, and I'm going to touch on it and then move away from it. And if you want more information about this, there is so much out. Our bodies are designed to go through periods of food where we eat and consume energy, and periods of time where we don't. And we know this because if we look at the beginning of humanhood over time, is that we have had periods of feast and we have had periods of fast. And so this chemical input that you're bringing in is vital to keep us full of energy. But imagine if you went to work and every day you went to work, and then one day your boss said, hey, actually, I need you to stay a bit later tonight. And you're like, yeah, no worries. And then he said, actually, I need you to stay until tomorrow morning. And you're like, what? I don't get to sleep. And then he says, I need you to stay actually all week and never go home. And I need you to do that for the next year. And then actually, perhaps probably the years after that, you'd be going, okay, first of all, I'm a chiropractor. This is not how I work. I work my 15 to 20 hours a week and then I go home and relax. And if you're a principal, maybe that's not quite the process that you're in yet. But what you understand is that is not okay. However, this is what we're asking our digestive systems to do. We are asking our digestive systems to work 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day if you haven't got into the intermittent fasting fad. And we're asking it to do it every month, every year for our whole lives. But our bodies aren't designed that way. Our bodies are designed to go through periods of feast and periods of fast. And so if you've never had a taste of a long-term fast, perhaps 5 or 7 days, where your digestive system comes to a point where it slows down and stops and gets a break from the overload of the chemical input, and then gets to start up again after you've given it a break, where you bring in foods and see how they really consumed and how your body responds to them, then I suggest that this is something that you have a little go at, because any chemical, whether it be good or whether it be bad, we should always have a break from it. You know you need to change up your skincare routine. You know it's good not to eat the same foods all the time. You know that it's important to not be inside all the time or not be outside all the time. It's the same with our food. We're designed to have periods of feast and periods of fast. So perhaps that's something to have a look at when it comes to your chemical load within your system, because we're designed to have a break. And when you have a break, what happens when you come back? Well, studies show that your immune system almost doubles in its ability to handle overwhelm. It shows that our digestive system and our metabolism actually speeds up after you've broken your fast and come back. It shows that our serotonin and dopamine levels are much more in balance. It shows that there's a massive change in our hormones, both male and female. And so speaking of hormones, these are our chemical receptors in our body. And so our hormonal system is our glandular system, and it's made up of all of the hormones that get secreted by the little glands that start in our brain and communicate all the way down our body. And it is massively connected. And just like I've said 2 or 3 times before, the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. Everything affects the way that everything else works. In fact, I've never seen a thyroid problem, for example, that hasn't had a tapeworm attached to it. And so you start to do something like a fast, and then the body will start to do some excreting, some detoxification. After some time, there's not the overload of the food chemicals. The tapeworms realize they don't have anything to eat anymore. The tapeworms let go. All of a sudden, we don't need thyroxine anymore, of course, unless there's been a thyroid removal. And this is how everything is connected. Now, our hormones, one of them thyroid hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, T3, T4, free T3, and free T4, start to change. And so when we're looking at our chemical system, we can't just look at one element, although every element makes up the whole pie, and we need somewhere to begin. And there is an inherent change that occurs when we can just consume one piece of the pie. So why is it important to have a look at all of the different pieces of the pie, all of the different chemical exposures or non-exposures that you're having in your life, and see where they stand, and see how they're affecting you, and see how they're not affecting you, and see how you can get more out of your life, and see how you can reduce a load that you didn't even realize was creating an overwhelm within your system. Parasites, bugs. If your bacteria is low, your immune system low, the parasite level is going to be high. This is a chemical component within your system, which changes when you change your hormone, which changes when you have the ability to stop something that is so normal, i.e. eating, which is stimulated by a chemical hormone receptor in the brain to say when you see food, you want to eat. And that's because we didn't always get to see food, but now we do. And so we're biologically wired to eat, of course. And so we have to step into a really, really different part of our consciousness when we do take away something that is so normal, like eating. Which actually leads me to the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about, or that the world of plant medicine. And plant medicine has very much resurfaced recently in the last 5-10 years. So much so that we are seeing trials in university with psilocybin, and I mean, perhaps MDMA is not necessarily a plant medicine. 5-MeO-DMT, looking at treatment-resistant depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, and the effects that these plants are starting to have on people that have these ailments, which is really exciting. And from there, of course, there is what happens in the medical world, what happens underground, and then what happens on the street. And I guess we are the people that are exposed to what happens on the street, right? And there is this big argument that because there is plants, they land in the category of food, right? So because marijuana is a plant, it can be something that can be taken on a regular basis, because it is something that isn't unnatural. It's not a chemical that's made in a lab, and perhaps this is true, and yet what we know is that even though food is something that is sustainable and that keeps us alive and gives us energy, we are over consuming it massively as humans. And we're not taking a break. And so what would it be like if we viewed all plants that way? There's a big movement of microdosing with mushrooms, which they're seeing big changes in default mode mechanism within our brain, which is so exciting. And microdosing is meant to be done over really short periods of time. And then all of a sudden what we're seeing is people doing it regularly and on a regular basis. What would it be like to use the chemicals within our system to get high? What would it be like to stop eating and see what it was like to have such a clean slate, and the opposite to a chemical overload of food information, of plant medicine information, of stuff that they're spraying on our food, chemical information, of beauty product information? What if we just took ourselves out of the chemical load for a little while and watched the potential of our body? Because it is our inherent right to have exposure of the natural chemical high within our body without all of the load that we're constantly overwhelming our system with. So if you haven't yet, and maybe this week is not the moment, maybe this month is not the moment, but give yourself a week or two where everything just stops. The caffeine chemical hit stops. The food chemical hit stops. The plant medicine chemical hit stops, and see what your body's capable of. Because a lot of us don't know the potential of our body, and we talk about this until we go blue in the face when it comes to chiropractic. We talk about the nervous system. But what if the nervous system didn't have a chemical load? What if you had the capacity to see your true potential when you take away that chemical load? And I'm not telling you to stop eating and become a breatharian, although it's quite possible. Victor Truviani, I believe that's his last name, hasn't eaten or drunk anything for 14 years. I invite you to Google him. He hasn't had a chemical load within the system for that amount of time. He has lost his hair 3 times and grown it back. He's lost his teeth 4 times and regrown his teeth. What happens when we stop the chemical load within our body is extravagant. People don't believe it. They've put him in labs and studied him for weeks at a time because they don't believe what he's doing is possible. It's a miracle what we can see when we stop the chemical overload in our bodies. And yet it's so important. And so it's have a play in the world where there's not, because we've been playing in the world where there is, and this is where we live at the moment. There's no right or wrong or good or bad place to be, but it's like, what would it be like if you hung out here for a little while? Questers, it's been a pleasure taking this time with you. I hope that you've taken a little, or perhaps there's been a little seed that you already have sown and we've watered it a little bit, or you have become aware of something that you want to dive into in this chat. Until next time, have fun getting rid of the chemicals in your world to see what you're truly capable of. Take care.